The letter was sitting on the kitchen counter when Cleopatra got home. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter. Cream-colored envelope, thick paper, the kind that cost money just to touch, propped against the sugar jar like it belonged there. Like it hadn't just detonated quietly in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday in the Bronx. She almost walked past it. She was tired in the specific way that 18-year-olds are tired when they have been carrying adult weight since they were 12. The kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and doesn't leave after sleep. She'd just done a 9-hour shift at the laundromat on Morris Avenue, still had detergent faint on her wrists, and all she wanted was rice and the 40 minutes of silence before her father came home. Then she saw her name, Cleopatra Mensah, written in full, in ink, on the front of an envelope that had no stamp, no return address, no explanation for how it had gotten inside a locked apartment on the fourth floor of a Bronx walk-up. She set her bag down slowly, picked it up. The paper inside was brief, precise, the kind of language that had been chosen by someone who understood that words, used correctly, were their own kind of threat. Miss Mensah, your father's situation has come to our attention. A meeting has been arranged. Sunday, 7 p.m. The address below. 2 parties will be present. Come alone. Come prepared to listen. 2 names at the bottom. Zion, Marcus. That was all. No explanation of what situation meant, though she already knew, had known for months, the way children of struggling men always know before they're told. Reading it in the second phone her father kept hidden in his coat pocket, in the way he flinched at knocking, in the envelopes he burned in the kitchen sink when he thought she was asleep. Her father, Emmanuel Mensah, owed money. Not the ordinary kind of debt, not credit cards or back rent, though there was that too. The kind of debt that didn't come with payment plans or customer service numbers. The kind of debt that sent cream-colored letters to your daughter's apartment without leaving fingerprints. She read the letter twice. The second time, she noticed her hands were completely steady. That frightened her more than the shaking would have. She knew the name Zion the way everyone in certain parts of New York knew it. Not from news articles or police reports, because men like Zion rarely appeared in either. She knew it from the way her father's voice dropped when he said it, and from the particular silence that fell in a room when someone mentioned him. Zion was dark-skinned, dreadlocks thick and long, the kind of man who occupied space differently than other men. Like gravity pulled slightly harder in his direction, and everything nearby had to adjust. He moved through the Bronx and Harlem like he owned the architecture, and depending on who you asked, he more or less did. Marcus Hale was a different species of dangerous. British, white, low-cut hair, the sharp kind. Like even his appearance had been optimized for efficiency. He had arrived in New York 4 years ago and spent those years quietly absorbing the financial infrastructure of 3 mid-sized companies in one neighborhood bank. When he wore suits that cost more than Cleopatra's rent and was reportedly the kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he had never once needed to. His name appeared in business pages beside words like aggressive acquisition and hostile restructuring, and in certain other circles beside words that business pages didn't print. Her father had borrowed from both of them. That was the part that sat in her chest like a stone, not just the debt, but the shape of it. Emmanuel Mensah, who had come from Accra to New York 20 years ago with a suitcase and a plan, who had tried 6 different businesses and watched 5 of them fail, who loved his daughter with a quietness that sometimes looked like distance. That man had somehow gotten himself tangled with 2 of the most powerful and most dangerous men in the city, and now those men knew her name. Cleopatra folded the letter along its original crease, set it on the counter, went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and drank all of it standing at the sink looking out at the Bronx skyline, doing its ordinary evening thing, fire escapes and water towers, and the distant red blink of a plane. She thought about running. It lasted approximately 4 seconds. Then she thought about her father's hands, the way they shook slightly now when he poured his morning coffee, the way he'd stopped singing in the kitchen the way he used to when she was small, the way he looked at her sometimes like she was the only thing still holding his life in a recognizable shape. She couldn't run. She turned from the window. The front door opened and Emmanuel came in. Tall, a little stooped now. His good coat on, even though it wasn't cold enough for it. He saw her face and stopped in the doorway, with his key still in his hand, and she watched him understand in real time that she had already read it. "Cleo, don't," she said, quietly, without anger, which was somehow worse. "Not yet." He closed the door, sat down heavily on the couch. She came and sat across from him, not beside him, across, and looked at her father the way you look at someone you love and are furious at simultaneously, when the love is bigger than the fury, but only just. "Tell me everything," she said, "not the version where you protect me, the real one." Emmanuel Mensa looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he told her. It took 40 minutes. By the end of it, the apartment was dark, and neither of them had turned on a light, and Cleopatra was sitting very still with her hands folded in her lap, like she was in a waiting room, like she was waiting for her own life to call her name. The debt was real. The danger was real. And the two men who had sent this letter had apparently, through sources her father couldn't or wouldn't name, decided that the resolution they wanted was not financial. They wanted to meet her. They were, her father said, his voice barely above a whisper, shame wrapped around every syllable, interested in her, in the possibility of her, in her hand. "I'm 18, Cleopatra said. "I know. I've never even—" She stopped, reset. "I don't know these men. I know, Cleo. And they think they can just—" She pressed her lips together, breathed. "And they think because you owe them money, I become some kind of— No one is forcing you. The letter found its way into our locked apartment, Daddy." Her voice was very controlled. "That's a kind of force." Emmanuel had no answer for that. Cleopatra stood up, walked to the window again, looked at the city, her city, this enormous, indifferent, magnificent city that had eaten better people than her whole, and asked for seconds. She was 18 years old. She had never been on a real date, had never let anyone close enough to matter, had kept herself wrapped carefully inside her own life, like something that needed protecting. Her mother had died when she was 11, and she had learned early that love was also the name of the specific way things could be taken from you. She had kept herself, deliberately, completely. And now two men she had never met were sitting somewhere in this city, apparently believing one of them would have her. The audacity of it was almost architectural, almost impressive. She turned from the window. "I'll go Sunday," she said. Her father's head came up. "I'll go. I'll meet them. I'll sit in whatever room they've arranged, and I will listen." She reached out and turned on the lamp. One small, ordinary act of returning light to the room. "But they should know something before I get there." "What?" her father asked. Cleopatra looked at him steadily. "I'm not something that gets decided. I'm someone who decides." The lamp made a warm circle on the ceiling. Outside, New York kept going in its relentless way. Horns and sirens and the low, steady roar of 10 million people living simultaneously. Inside the apartment, Emmanuel Mensah looked at his daughter, and for the first time in months, beneath all the shame and the fear, something that might have been pride moved quietly across his face. Cleopatra picked up the letter, folded it, and put it in her pocket. Sunday was 4 days away. She had 4 days to figure out how to walk into a room containing two of the most dangerous men in New York City and walk out still belonging entirely to herself. She went to her room, sat on her bed, opened her journal to a clean page, and at the top, in her careful, deliberate handwriting, she wrote, "I will not be a prize. Dearest viewers, Has anyone ever made a decision that changed your life without asking you first, and you had no choice but to face it head on? Drop it in the comments.
If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me keep bringing you more amazing love stories. All right, back to the story.
The laundromat smelled like fabric softener and other people's problems. Oh, Cleopatra had worked at Suds and Spin on Morris Avenue for 8 months, since the September after she graduated high school, when the plan to start community college quietly collapsed under the weight of rent that didn't care about plans. She folded other people's clothes and sorted other people's colors and listened to the particular rhythm of machines that never stopped. And she had made a kind of peace with it, the way young people make peace with things they intend to be temporary. She was good at temporary peace. She was behind the counter on Wednesday morning, 2 days after the letter, when her best friend Kezia walked in without any laundry. That was how Cleopatra knew something was wrong. Kezia always came with laundry, even when she didn't need to do laundry, because Kezia was the kind of person who needed a prop to justify being somewhere, as though friendship alone wasn't sufficient reason. No laundry meant she had heard something. Kezia was Jamaican Dominican, small and loud in the way that small people sometimes are, to compensate for the space the world doesn't automatically give them. She had natural hair she kept in big puffs and an expression that cycled rapidly between warmth and judgment, with very little transition time. She had been Cleopatra's closest friend since 7th grade, which meant she had 17 years of practice at reading the specific language of Cleopatra's silences. She slid onto the counter stool, looked at Cleopatra folding a fitted sheet with mechanical precision, and said, "Your dad called my mom." Cleopatra didn't look up. Of course he did. She called me. Of course she did. Cleo. Kezia leaned forward on both elbows. Zion, and some British billionaire? That's not a situation, that's a whole entire movie. I'm aware. Are you scared? Cleopatra finally looked up. She considered the question with genuine seriousness, the way she considered most things. Not performing calm, but actually sorting through her interior like she was looking for something she'd misplaced. Yes, she said, but not the way you mean. What other way is there? I'm not scared of them. She set the sheet down, started on a pillowcase. I'm scared of what my father might agree to if I don't handle this myself. I'm scared of walking into that room and having them look at me like I'm already someone's answer. She folded the pillowcase in 3 precise movements. I'm scared of losing something I've never even had the chance to fully become yet. Kezia was quiet for a moment, which was rare enough that it meant something. You know what Zion looks like? She asked. I've seen him once, from a distance, outside the fish market on Burnside. Cleopatra paused. She stopped. He's what? Tall, she said finally, which was true but also not the complete truth, and they both knew it. Kezia's eyes narrowed with the precision of a woman who had been lied to by understatement before. And the British one? I've never seen him. I looked him up. Kezia pulled out her phone and slid it across the counter without comment. Cleopatra looked at the screen. Marcus Hale, a photograph from some financial gala. Black tuxedo, low clean cut, sharp jaw, white. The kind of face that had been assembled by genetics into something that would have been handsome if it weren't so aggressively controlled. He was photographed mid-conversation with someone, but his eyes were elsewhere in the frame, already looking at something the camera hadn't caught, like he was always 3 steps ahead of whatever room he was standing in. She slid the phone back. They're both dangerous, she said, obviously, and they both think this is a negotiation they can win. Also, obviously, Kezia retrieved her phone, looked at the picture herself for perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. The question is what you think. Cleopatra turned back to the laundry. What she thought was this. She was 18 years old and she had spent the last 6 years being the responsible one. The one who cooked when her father forgot, who managed the bills when the math stopped working, who had put aside every ordinary teenage thing because ordinary teenage things required a kind of lightness she couldn't afford. She had never been to prom, had never had a boyfriend, had held herself in careful reserve like money she was saving for something important, though she couldn't always name what. She had kept herself untouched, not from fear, not from religion, but from something more personal than either. A quiet conviction that when she finally let someone in, it would be her choice entirely, without debt or obligation or a cream-colored envelope arranging the terms. That was the thing the letter had threatened. Not her safety, her authorship. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'm going to walk into that room on Sunday, and I'm going to be so completely and absolutely myself that neither of them will know what to do with me." Kezia looked at her for a long beat. Then she smiled. The real one. The one she didn't give out carelessly. "That's my girl." Emmanuel Mensa, at 51, was a man who had mistaken motion for progress for most of his adult life. He had come to New York from Accra in 2004 with a business degree, a wife, and an appetite for the American version of success that the movies had described with such convincing specificity. He had opened a phone repair shop in 2007. It lasted 3 years. A catering company in 2011. His wife, Ruth's idea, her recipes, or her dream, which had been doing well when Ruth got sick and then was not doing well and then was not doing anything at all. After Ruth died in 2015, Emmanuel had tried 2 more ventures, both of which had failed in the specific way that things fail when the person running them has stopped fully believing. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had been broken by grief and rebuilt himself imperfectly, with pieces missing, and had tried to hide the gaps from the daughter who needed him to be whole. The debt had started as a business loan. Zion had offered it 3 years ago through a mutual contact Emmanuel should never have trusted, with terms that seemed reasonable at the time, the way things seem reasonable when you are desperate enough to stop reading the fine print. Marcus Hale had come later, buying the debt from a credit company that had acquired Emmanuel's defaulted bank loan, which was the kind of financial maneuver that was technically legal and entirely predatory. 2 different men, 2 different methods, the same result. Emmanuel had not told Cleopatra how either of them had learned about her. The truth was he suspected it was someone who had seen her at the laundromat, had mentioned her in the wrong company, and the wrong company had found the information useful. That was how it worked. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just the ordinary ugliness of powerful men noticing what other people had. He sat in the kitchen on Wednesday evening while Cleopatra made jollof rice without being asked, moving around the kitchen in her quiet, competent way. And he watched his daughter and tried to find the words for the apology that lived in the center of his chest like a splinter. "You don't have to go," he said, for the 4th time since Sunday. Cleopatra stirred the pot without turning around. "We've had this conversation. I can find another way." "With what, Daddy?" The question was gentle. That was the worst part. She had stopped asking it with anger 2 days ago, and now she asked it with something gentler and more final, like she had already moved past the phase of being hurt and into the phase of just solving the problem. "I'll handle it," he said. She turned then, wooden spoon in hand, and looked at him with the particular expression she had inherited from her mother. Dark eyes steady, mouth soft. The look that meant "I love you and I don't believe you," and both of those things are true at the same time. "Let me go Sunday," she said. "Let me see what they actually want, and then we'll figure out the rest." Emmanuel nodded slowly. Later, after dinner, after she had washed the dishes and gone to her room, he sat alone at the kitchen table with his hands around a mug that had gone cold and thought about Ruth. About what Ruth would have said about all of this. About what Ruth would have done. He thought she would have been furious. He thought she would have also, quietly, trusted their daughter. He tried to do both. Across town, in 2 very different rooms, Two very different men were thinking about Sunday. To him in a Harlem apartment that looked like it shouldn't exist in a building that looked like it did. Sleek interior behind an unremarkable door, the kind of space that suggested its owner had specific opinions about being underestimated. Zion Adiemi sat by a window with a glass of water and looked at the city. He was 34. His dreads were pulled back loosely tonight, falling past his shoulders, a few with thin gold thread woven through them that caught the light when he moved. He had a face that people remembered. Strong jaw, dark skin, eyes that were unhurried in a way that made other people feel like they were always slightly behind. He ran 3 businesses that appeared in no paperwork, 2 that did, and then had built his operation over 11 years through a combination of intelligence and the particular kind of patience that only people who had grown up with nothing ever truly developed. He had not intended to become interested in Emmanuel Mensa's daughter. He had expected when the name came to him to feel nothing more than the practical satisfaction of a problem being resolved. He had debts owed to him by men who couldn't pay money, and there were traditional ways of resolving such things, none of which he particularly enjoyed anymore. But then someone had described her, not her appearance, though that had been mentioned too, but the way she handled herself, working at a laundromat to support her father, 18 years old and already carrying things that would bend most grown people. Quiet, they said, serious, out of the kind of still that wasn't emptiness, but depth. He had found himself, almost against his will, curious. Zion was not accustomed to being curious about people. He looked at the city for a long time. Then he finished his water, set the glass down, and went back to work. He had a rule about wanting things. You examine the want carefully from every angle before you move toward it. Wanting without examination was how men like him made mistakes they couldn't afford. He would see her Sunday, then he would examine the want. In a midtown penthouse that made no apologies for itself, floor-to-ceiling glass, the city laid out below like a presentation, Marcus Hale stood at his window in a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow and reviewed a file on his tablet that was not a financial file. He was 38. The low cut was fresh. He kept it that way, precise, controlled, the same way he kept everything. He had a lawyer's face, not warm, not cold exactly, but carefully neutral in the way of someone who had learned early that visible emotion was a negotiating disadvantage. He had bought Emmanuel Mensa's debt as part of a larger portfolio acquisition and had initially given it no more thought than he gave any non-performing asset. It was the background check, standard procedure, in that had surfaced Cleopatra. The information was factual, dry, 18, single, no college enrollment, works at a laundromat, primary caretaker dynamic with father, no recorded relationships. He had read it 3 times. He did not examine why. Marcus Hale was precise about most things and deliberately imprecise about his own motivations when the motivations were inconvenient. What he told himself was this: he was 38 and had spent 20 years building an empire that had no one to leave it to, and there was a practical logic to that problem that required a practical solution. That was what he told himself. He set the tablet down, poured 2 fingers of scotch, stood at the window and watched the city and thought about a girl he hadn't met yet, who had apparently told her father, according to his source, that she was not something that gets decided. Something in the corner of his chest, in a place he rarely acknowledged, moved. He brought the glass to his lips. Sunday, he thought. 2 powerful men. 1 remarkable girl. Not into Sunday that none of them will walk away from unchanged. Who do you think she'll feel something for first? And why? Tell me below. Sunday arrived the way difficult things always do, quietly without warning, wearing the ordinary face of just another morning. Cleopatra was up before her alarm. She lay in the gray pre-dawn stillness of her room and stared at the ceiling and listened to the Bronx wake up around her. The first buses, the early risers, someone 3 floors down who made coffee loudly every morning at 5:15, like it was a civic duty. She had slept in pieces, waking every hour or so with the particular alertness of someone whose brain had decided that rest was a luxury the occasion didn't permit. She got up at 6, showered for a long time. I stood under the water until the hot ran to warm and the warm ran to cool, and her thoughts had settled from the churning they'd been doing all week into something flatter and more manageable. She had made her decision. She had made it on Tuesday night with the journal open on her knee, and she had not unmade it once since, which was how she knew it was the right one. She was going. She was going as herself, and she was coming home still herself. The rest would follow from that, or it wouldn't. She stood in front of her small mirror for longer than usual. The address on the letter was in Midtown, a building on 57th Street that she had looked up and found listed as a private members club, the kind of place that didn't have a Yelp page because the people who used it didn't need to be reviewed. The letter had said 7 p.m. It was currently 6 a.m. She had 13 hours to inhabit the strange suspended state of someone waiting for their own life to make a move. She chose her clothes carefully, not to impress, not to diminish herself either. Something in between, something that said, I know exactly who I am, and I dressed accordingly. She settled on a deep emerald green wrap dress that had been her mother's, altered to fit her, with black-heeled ankle boots and small gold earrings. She kept her natural hair out, a full, soft crown of coils that she usually tied back for work, and almost never left free because it felt too exposed. Today she left it free. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. I am not a prize, she thought. Then she went to make breakfast for her father. Emmanuel was already in the kitchen when she got there. He was in his good coat again, the navy one, sitting at the table with a cup of tea he hadn't touched, hands folded, watching the door like he'd been waiting for her to appear and confirm she was still real. He looked at her in the green dress, and his face did something complicated and quiet. Your mother wore that, he said. I know. He nodded once, said nothing else, which was its own kind of conversation. They ate together, eggs and toast, the food of ordinary mornings, and didn't talk about where she was going, because talking about it again would have changed nothing and cost something. Emmanuel kept almost saying things and stopping himself, and Cleopatra let him, and they ate their eggs in a silence that was heavy but not unkind. When she stood to leave at 6:45, she was taking the subway to Casia's first, and they had agreed she shouldn't go to this building straight from the Bronx like she had nowhere else to be. Emmanuel stood too. He reached into his coat pocket and put something on the table. A photograph. Cleopatra picked it up. It was her mother. Ruth Mensa, 23 years old, standing in front of a building in Accra in a yellow dress, laughing at whoever was behind the camera. Young and unguarded and completely alive. She would have known what to say tonight, Emmanuel said. I don't, but she would have. He cleared his throat. You have her instincts, more than you know. Cleopatra looked at the photograph for a moment. Then she put it carefully in her purse, kissed her father on the cheek, and walked out the door. Kezia spent 45 minutes being supportive and approximately 3 minutes dissolving into undisguised excitement. I'm just saying, she said, perched on her bed while Cleopatra sat at the small vanity. Objectively speaking, as a non-involved observer, you are the most involved observer possible. Two powerful, objectively attractive men are about to meet you for the first time tonight, and I just think that deserves a moment of acknowledgement before we get back to the very serious and important emotional preparation. Cleopatra looked at her in the mirror. Are you finished? Not even slightly. Kezia held up her phone again. The photo of Marcus Hale from the gala. Look at this jaw, Cleo. Just look at it. I'm not marrying a jaw. No. But a jaw like that makes the conversation easier. Cleopatra laughed despite herself. A real one, short and surprised, the kind that came out before you could edit it. Casey grinned like she'd won something. The laughter lasted a few seconds and then faded, and they looked at each other in the mirror, and the real thing was back between them. The weight of tonight, the uncertainty of it, the way it sat on Cleopatra's shoulders like weather. What if they're both awful? Cleopatra said quietly. Then you tell them both to go to hell, and we figure out your dad's dead another way. There isn't another way. There's always another way. Kezia moved to sit beside her. But Cleo, what if one of them isn't awful? What if one of them is actually... Don't. I'm just saying, Kezia. Cleopatra turned to look at her directly. When I am 18 years old, I have never been in love. I have never even been close. She paused. I am not going to this meeting to fall for anyone. I'm going to handle a situation. Kezia looked at her with the specific patience of someone who had read enough stories to know how they tended to go. Okay, she said simply. They took the subway together as far as 42nd Street, where Kezia hugged her hard and long, and then held her at arm's length and looked at her the way people look at someone they're proud of and afraid for simultaneously. Text me, Kezia said. Every hour, Cleopatra promised. She walked the rest of the way alone. The building on 57th Street was exactly what she had imagined and worse. Not worse in an ugly way, worse in an expensive way, on the kind of expensive that was specifically designed to make people feel like they didn't belong, which was itself a kind of power. A dark glass facade, a doorman who was too well dressed to be just a doorman, a lobby that whispered money so quietly it was louder than shouting. She gave her name. The doorman, whose expression did not change by a single millimeter, confirmed it against a list, nodded and directed her to the 4th floor. The elevator was mirrored. She watched herself ascend. Green dress, gold earrings, hair free, spine straight. She looked like someone who knew where she was going, even when she absolutely did not. I am not a prize, she thought, for the 14th time that week. The elevator opened onto a short hallway and a set of double doors already slightly ajar. She could hear voices, low, measured, in the kind of voices that were accustomed to rooms that listened. She pushed the doors open. The room was smaller than she'd expected. Not a ballroom, not a boardroom, a private dining room, richly furnished, a round table set for 3 in the center, low amber lighting, a wall of windows showing the midtown skyline doing its extraordinary nighttime thing. It was intimate in a way that felt deliberate, like someone had decided that a small room was a more efficient kind of power. 2 men stood at opposite ends of the room. She saw Zion first, because Zion was the kind of person you saw first. It wasn't a choice. He was standing by the window, and the city light was behind him, which should have made him hard to read, but somehow didn't. He was exactly as she had half remembered from that one distant glimpse on Burnside Avenue, when an entirely different up close, taller, with a quality of stillness that wasn't passivity, but something more like coiled attention. His dreads were loose tonight, falling past his shoulders, a few with those thin gold threads she hadn't expected. He was wearing all black, a fitted black shirt, dark trousers, and he was looking at her with eyes that were unhurried and completely direct. He didn't smile. Neither did she. Then she made herself look to the right. Marcus Hale was standing near the table with a glass of water in his hand and an expression that was neutral in the precise, practiced way of someone who had trained themselves out of first reactions. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit over a white shirt, no tie, the top button open. The jaw, she thought involuntarily, was exactly as Kezia had noted. And he was watching her the way you watch something unexpected, with the slightly arrested quality of a person recalibrating. The 3 of them existed in a silence that lasted perhaps 4 seconds, and felt considerably longer. Then Marcus set his glass down. "Miss Mensah," he said, British accent just slightly smoothed by years in New York. "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't," she said. It was the truth, and she said it simply, without aggression. And she watched both men register it. Zion with a slight shift of his weight. Marcus with a fractional stillness. "Please," Marcus said, gesturing to the table. "Sit." "I'll stand for a moment," she said, "if you don't mind." A pause. "Of course," he said. She stood in the center of that room, between a drug baron by the window and a billionaire by the table. With the New York skyline behind them, both like a backdrop someone had hung specifically to be intimidating. And she breathed once, slowly, and looked at each of them in turn. "I want to establish something before we sit down," she said. Her voice was steady. She was astonished by how steady it was. "My father owes you both money. That's real, and I'm not pretending otherwise. But I am not a debt payment." She held eye contact with Marcus first, then turned to Zion. "I'm not a resolution. I'm not a prize, and I'm not a transaction." She paused. "If either of you sees me that way, we can end the evening right now and find another arrangement." The silence that followed was the specific quality of silence that falls when people are recalibrating. Zion spoke first. His voice was low, not quiet, but low, the kind that came from the chest. Unhurried, like he decided long ago not to waste energy on volume when he could use weight instead. "Noted," he said. Just that. Noted. And somehow it landed like more than one word. Marcus looked at her for a moment longer. Then something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one, the kind that escaped before the control caught it. "Noted," he said as well. Cleopatra looked at them both. Then she walked to the table and sat down. The evening began. What happened over the next 2 hours was not what she had prepared for. She had prepared for pressure, for manipulation, for the particular brand of charm that men with power aimed at people they wanted things from. She had prepared to be managed. She had not prepared for Marcus Hale to ask her, with apparent genuine interest, what she thought about urban rezoning policy in the Bronx. She had not prepared for Zion to listen to her answer without interrupting, and then respond with something specific and considered that suggested he had not only heard her, but thought about it. She had not prepared for the dinner conversation to feel, at intervals, almost like a conversation between actual people. It disoriented her. She kept waiting for the angle to reveal itself. It didn't. Not yet. What she noticed instead, in the part of her mind she kept running as observation, even while she talked and ate and maintained her composure, was that the two men barely spoke to each other. They were cordial in the cold, careful way of people who occupied the same space by necessity and mutual respect, and nothing warmer. They directed everything to her, both of them, when in the room had a strange triangular energy that she felt on her skin, like a change in air pressure. She noticed other things too. The way Zion's hands were still when he talked, completely still, resting on the table, like his body had no wasted movements. And the way Marcus refilled her water glass without asking, twice, and she wasn't sure he was even aware he'd done it. The way Zion looked at her when she said something he found interesting. Not surprised exactly, more like confirmed, like she was matching something he'd already hypothesized. The way Marcus looked at her when she laughed at something, just once, briefly, at a dry comment she'd made about the menu. And his expression in that half second before he composed it back to neutral had been something she filed away carefully and didn't examine yet. At 9 p.m., Marcus set down his fork. "We should discuss the practical matter," he said. "The practical matter," she repeated. "Your father's debt, and what resolution looks like." He was careful and direct. She'd give him that. I'll be plain with you, Miss Mensa, because I think you prefer plain. He glanced briefly at Zion. We have both expressed interest in a formal courtship, not a transaction. I take your point from earlier seriously. A courtship, time, a fair chance for you to know us and for us to know you. At the end of which, if you have no interest in either of us, the debt will be settled by other means. Cleopatra absorbed that. Other means, she said. What other means? Extended payment plan, 10 years, zero interest. He said it evenly, like a number he'd already decided on. That offer exists regardless of your decision about the courtship. She turned to Zion. Same, he said. The debt doesn't disappear if you say no. It becomes manageable. She looked at him. Then why offer the courtship at all? Zion held her gaze. Because I want to, he said simply, as if want was a sufficient reason, as if he had never once in his life dressed up his desires in more diplomatic language than they required. Something about the directness of it, the unadorned simplicity of because I want to, moved through her like a current she didn't entirely know what to do with. She looked back at Marcus, who was watching her with that careful, neutral expression. And you? She asked. Same answer, he said. Less simply put, but the same. Cleopatra sat with it. She thought about her mother's photograph in her purse, about Kezia waiting for a text, about her father alone in the kitchen in his good coat, about the journal page and the line she'd written. I have conditions, she said. Both men waited. I continue working. I don't stop my life. I go on my own timeline, not yours. She kept her voice level. I'm not choosing anyone tonight or next week or because of a deadline. This happens at my pace or it doesn't happen. She looked between them. And neither of you pressures the other out. Whatever this is, it stays fair or it stops. A silence, then Zion nodded once. Marcus said, Agreed. Cleopatra folded her napkin and set it beside her plate. Then I'll consider it, she said. She stood up to leave at 9:30. Both men stood when she did. She noticed that. He filed it somewhere. And Marcus walked with her to the elevator while Zion remained by the window watching. At the elevator, Marcus pressed the button and they stood beside each other for a moment in the short hallway. And she was aware of him the way you are aware of weather, not looking directly at it but feeling it on your skin. You were not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? He considered it. Less, he said finally. The elevator arrived. She stepped in, turned around. That's the first interesting thing you've said all evening, she told him. The doors closed on whatever his face did next. She rode down alone in the mirrored elevator and looked at herself. Green dress, gold earrings, hair still free, and felt the evening settling around her like something that had just changed its shape. She texted Kezia from the lobby. Still me, coming home. Tell you everything. Then she walked out into the New York night. The real New York. The loud and indifferent and magnificent New York. And breathed it in and thought about two men in a room above her and a decision she hadn't made and the long, complicated road of what came next. Her phone buzzed. Kezia, call me right now. She smiled, started walking, called her. The week after Sunday moved differently. Cleopatra noticed it the way you notice a change in season, not in one dramatic moment, but in the accumulation of small things that didn't used to be there. A black car idling on Morris Avenue on Monday morning that she didn't recognize. A message on her phone Tuesday from a number that identified itself simply as M. Hale. No greeting. She's just a link to an article about Bronx rezoning policy with a single line beneath it. You made a good point Sunday. This supports it. A bouquet of deep yellow flowers on the laundromat counter Wednesday that Kezia accepted on her behalf from a delivery person who left no card. Though the flowers themselves, bird of paradise, her mother's favorite, suggested someone had done their research. She did not text Marcus back immediately. She waited 2 days, then sent, "I know." She told herself it wasn't a game. It was just that she needed to move at her own pace, and her own pace was deliberate. The flowers were from Zion. She knew without being told, not because of any note, but because of the specific quality of the gesture. Marcus would have sent a card. Marcus was the kind of man who documented things. The cardless delivery, with the chosen flower with its personal detail, that was someone who listened more than he spoke and acted on what he heard. She put the bird of paradise in a vase on the kitchen counter at home and did not tell her father where they came from. The first time she saw Zion again was not arranged. It was a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the Sunday dinner, and she was on her lunch break from the laundromat, eating a sandwich on the low wall outside when a black SUV pulled up and Zion got out. Not for her, she understood immediately. He was on his phone, finishing a conversation, already moving toward the bodega 2 doors down. He hadn't seen her. Then he had. He stopped mid-stride, put the phone down from his ear, looked at her with that unhurried directness that she was beginning to understand was simply his default. Not a performance, not a calculated effect, just the way his attention functioned. Complete, like there was nothing else currently competing for it. Cleopatra, he said. She liked unreasonably that he used her full name. Most people shortened it within 30 seconds of meeting her. He had used the whole thing both times now, like he'd decided the abbreviation was an unnecessary loss. Zion, she said. He came and stood a few feet from her, not close enough to be presumptuous, far enough that she felt the space as a deliberate choice. He was in a dark olive jacket today over a black shirt, dreads pulled back with a single band, and he was looking at her with that confirming expression she'd noticed at dinner, like she continued to match something he'd hypothesized. "Coincidence?" she asked, nodding toward the bodega. "I come here Thursdays," he said. "Temp mango juice. They carry a specific brand." "Every Thursday?" "For about 3 years." She looked at him. "And you didn't know I worked here?" It wasn't quite a question. He answered it as the statement it was. "I knew," he said simply. "I didn't arrange this." The honesty of it was disarming, that he didn't pretend, didn't dress it in comfortable ambiguity. He knew she worked here, and he came anyway on his regular Thursday, and he wasn't going to lie about the first part to make the second part feel more innocent. She appreciated it more than she wanted to. "The flowers were beautiful," she said. Something moved in his expression. Not a smile, not quite, but a slight easing. "Your mother liked them." "How do you know that?" "Your father mentioned her once, a long time ago." Before the debt became what it became. He said it without drama, just information. He said she kept bird of paradise on the kitchen table every spring. Cleopatra looked at him for a moment. The fact that he had held that detail, a casual thing mentioned once years ago by a man he had a business arrangement with, and then used it not to impress her, but simply because it was accurate, because it was the right flower, and he knew it was the right flower, that landed somewhere she hadn't expected. "I have to get back," she said. "I know." He didn't move to stop her. "Thursday's a good day for mango juice," he said, which wasn't really about mango juice. She stood, gathered her sandwich wrapper, and paused. "I finish at 4, she said, which wasn't really about her shift. She went back inside. Through the laundromat window, she watched him go into the bodega, come out 3 minutes later with a bottle of juice and nothing else, get back in the SUV. She was still watching when the car pulled away. Kezia materialized at her shoulder from nowhere. "Was that—" "Don't," Cleopatra said. "I'm just—" "Kezia." "You were watching him leave, Cleo." "I was looking out the window." "Through the window, at him, leaving." Kezia tilted her head. "That's called watching someone leave." Cleopatra turned back to the laundry. Her ears were warm. Marcus called on Friday, not a text. A call, which felt deliberate, like he decided that whatever he wanted to say required a voice. She was on the subway home, the 4 train, pressed between a man reading a paperback and a woman with a stroller, and her phone buzzed and she looked at it and her stomach did something she didn't appreciate. She answered, "Miss Mensa, Mr. Hale." She kept her voice level over the train noise. "I got your article. I know you replied." 2 words. They were sufficient. She could hear the almost smile in his voice, in that controlled, fractional thing she'd noticed in the elevator. "I'm calling because I'd like to see you. Not a formal arrangement. Coffee, something ordinary." "Why ordinary?" A pause. "Because I think you respond better to ordinary than to orchestrated. I got the impression Sunday that you were waiting for the angle the whole evening." She stared at her reflection in the dark window across the car. He wasn't wrong. "Coffee," she said. "Saturday. Somewhere in your neighborhood. Wherever you're comfortable. I'll come to you." The offer surprised her. She had expected him to name somewhere in Midtown, somewhere that required her to travel to his territory. Coming to her was a concession she hadn't anticipated from a man who struck her as someone who arranged the terrain in his favor as a matter of habit. "There's a place on Fordham Road," she said. "Marta's. It opens at 8. I'll be there at 8. "I'll be there at 8:15, she said. "So we're clear on who's setting the pace." A beat. 8:15, he said. "Understood." She hung up and the man beside her turned a page of his paperback and the train rattled on, and Cleopatra looked at nothing and thought about the specific efficiency with which Marcus Hale made adjustments when he encountered resistance, and whether that was an admirable quality or a strategic one, and whether it was possible to be both. Marta's was a Bronx institution, booths with cracked vinyl, coffee that arrived without asking, a menu laminated so many times the edges had gone soft. It smelled like butter in decades, and Cleopatra loved it specifically because it was the opposite of the 57th Street dining room. Marcus was already there when she arrived, which meant he'd been there before 8:15. She glanced at her phone as she walked in. 8:14. He looked up from his coffee, saw her, and she watched him clock the 1-minute margin with an expression that was almost amused. He stood when she reached the booth. She noticed that again. Both times in the dining room, now here, like it was automatic. She slid into the booth across from him. He was different here. Same low cut, same controlled quality, but in a dark navy jacket over a simple gray t-shirt instead of a suit, and the absence of the suit changed the architecture of him somehow, made him look less like a presentation and more like a person. She ordered coffee. He already had some. "You grew up in the Bronx," he said. Not a question. "Whole life. What do you like about it?" She looked at him. "That's not what you actually want to ask." A pause. "No," he admitted. "I want to ask why you came Sunday when you didn't have to." "I told you. Your father's debt was manageable before you came. I already told you that Sunday. The 10-year plan exists regardless." He held her gaze steady. "So that wasn't why." Cleopatra wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. He was right, and she didn't love that he was right. "I came," she said slowly, "because I needed to see what I was dealing with. I needed to look at both of you and take your measure and make a decision from the inside of the situation instead of the outside of it." She paused. "I'm not someone who waits for things to happen to her. I'd rather walk into the fire and know what the fire actually is." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "How old did you say you were?" he said. "I didn't, but you know." 18, he said. The words seemed to give him some kind of private trouble. He looked at his coffee. "I'm 38. I'm aware. 20 years. I can do the math." Cleopatra. He said the whole name, the same way Zion did, And she noted that both of them did this, and she noted that she noted it. That gap isn't small. No, she agreed. It's not. Does it bother you? She considered it honestly. And it would bother me if you used it, if you treated me like I was young and therefore manageable. She met his eyes. Does it bother you? Something moved across his face, that fractional expression, the one that escaped the control. Yes, he said, but not in the way that makes me want to stop. The coffee shop clattered around them. A dropped spoon, two women laughing in the next booth, the bell above the door. Ordinary Saturday morning sounds. Tell me about what you actually do, she said. Not the official version. His eyes sharpened slightly. Why? Because I've read the official version. It's impressive and uninformative. She sipped her coffee. I want to know what you think about when you're doing it, what you're actually building. It was the right question. She could tell by the way he went still for a moment, not the controlled stillness of his neutral face, but something more genuine, like a pause for actual consideration. He started talking, and the thing that Cleopatra had not prepared for and would think about later alone in her room, was that he was interesting, not just impressive, not just strategic, actually genuinely interesting, in the way of someone who had thought deeply about things and had opinions and was accustomed to not sharing them and found unexpectedly the sharing of them difficult to stop once started. They stayed in that booth for 2 hours. She did not notice the time until Marta herself came to refill their coffee for the third time and gave Cleopatra a look that communicated approximately 17 separate observations. When they finally left, in Irushuk, they stood on Fordham Road in the February cold. She was in a camel wool coat over a cream turtleneck and dark jeans. He was in the navy jacket, which was not sufficient for February in the Bronx, and she didn't point that out. And the street was doing its ordinary Saturday thing around them, loud and vital and completely indifferent to whatever was happening in the small charged space between them. Same time next week? He asked. She looked at him. I'll think about it, she said. She was already thinking about it. She walked to the subway, did not look back, made it halfway down the stairs before she admitted to herself that the conversation had been the most interesting 2 hours she'd spent in as long as she could remember. And that admission sat in her chest with the specific discomfort of something she hadn't asked to feel. Once the Thursday after that, she happened to be on her lunch break when the black SUV appeared. She was already sitting on the wall. Zion got out, saw her, and this time the absence of surprise on his face suggested he had factored in the possibility. He went to the bodega, came back with 2 bottles of mango juice, handed her one without asking. She took it. They sat on the wall together in the thin March sunlight, her in her work uniform, him in a dark burgundy jacket, and drank mango juice and talked about nothing important and everything interesting for 35 minutes. And the conversation had a different quality than the one with Marcus. Less architecture, more landscape, more silence that felt full rather than empty, more sentences that started one place and ended somewhere unexpected. He told her, without being asked, that he had grown up in Harlem, that his mother had been a school teacher and his father had not been around, that he had made his first bad decision at 16 and had never stopped making them, but had become, over time, very skilled at managing the consequences. That sounds like a warning, she said. It is, he said simply. She looked at him. The sunlight caught the gold threads in his dreads and the honesty in his eyes, and both of those things were doing something to her equilibrium that she was actively refusing to examine. Why warn me, she asked, if you want me to consider you? Because I want you to consider me accurately, he said, not a version of me I constructed for the purpose. Cleopatra was quiet for a moment. Marcus told me he was 38, she said. Ah, like it was a warning. He's being careful with you, Zion said. No edge in it, just observation. And you? He looked at her steadily. I'm being honest with you. Those aren't always the same thing. She thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. That night she sat on her bed with the journal open and tried to write something clarifying, and instead wrote two names and then stared at them for a long time. The distance between them on the page was exactly the same. She closed the journal. Outside her window, the Bronx was being the Bronx, alive and unreasonable and completely itself. And Cleopatra lay back on her pillow and stared at the ceiling and felt for the first time in her 18 careful years, or had a specific disorienting sensation of her own heart beginning to move towards something before her mind had finished deciding whether it was safe. She didn't know which direction it was moving. That was the part she couldn't write down yet. She came in with walls, and two different men found two different doors. One brings her flowers and honest warnings. One brings her conversation and careful truths. One moves like the city, certain and unhurried. One thinks like the city, always 3 steps ahead. Which one do you think is getting closer? And which one doesn't even realize how close he already is? Dearest viewers, don't forget to hit the subscribe button as we bring you part 2 of the interesting story.